And when we truly surrender to this moment, then the movement of mind and the presence of feeling doesn't make any difference. It literally doesn't matter what the content of our consciousness is. Because we're resting as the I am presence. That is prior to all content. So it's like looking out of a window into the sky, watching the clouds. Moving and changing. But the window, the witness, is unchanging. It's like a mirror that allows everything. So we're simply resting in this radical acceptance of this moment. Okay, very good. So you can slowly open your eyes. So I'll just talk for a short time, not too long, and I want to make much more space today for any questions. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. I also sent some notes, which I hope you all got for the session today. So I wanted to go a bit more slowly and deeply into some of what I brought in the first Tolan, which was because I think I brought quite a lot in that Holon, maybe a little too much for a beginning. But I just wanted to go into it a little more slowly and then have the opportunity for you to ask any questions. And as I said in the email, what I'm sharing here is absolutely fundamental to what awakening is and how to make ourselves available to that possibility. And so it's very important, it's really important that you all have total clarity about this. Otherwise, there's going to be some degree of confusion, and you will find that you'll consistently lose touch with the absolute simplicity that this is all about. You know, the absolute simplicity that is at the heart of any genuine awakening teaching. So what I'm sharing with you is it's not unique. You'll find this at the core of all the authentic spiritual traditions and teachings, both ancient and modern. It may be, of course, it's articulated, it's expressed in many different ways, but it's essentially, in essence, pointing to the same shift in perception. So, as I emphasized last time, when we get to a point in our own evolution where we become interested in for real in enlightenment, in spiritual awakening, then we become receptive to what we could call the direct path. And by the direct path, I mean that we begin to recognize and understand in our own experience, through our own experience of seeking, and maybe through our experience of having had all kinds of, let's say, mystical experiences or spiritual experiences, we began to realize that is not it, that the freedom that we're deeply seeking, the understanding that we're longing for, is not to be found ultimately in any particular experience. Although usually what happens is when we have, let's say, a mystical or spiritual experience, there is a knowing, there is a recognition of our true nature there. But usually what comes along with it is the experiential elements, and this usually takes the form of some kind of ecstatic feeling or bliss or expansion, a sense of expansion. And usually what happens, because we're so conditioned to be seekers and to grasp at experience, to be materialists, is we associate the liberation that we actually experienced with the feeling quality, or whatever the qualities were that were extraordinary, that were unusual. And then we go in search again of these extraordinary or higher subtle state qualities. And this is the way in which spiritual experiences can both, they're kind of, they have a double-edged potential. They can both be very liberating because they give us faith and confidence that there is a reality that we are, that is beyond mind, and there are psychology and history and emotion. But at the same time, because we relate to we relate to experience through seeking and wanting, they can trap us. So often we can have beautiful, sublime spiritual experiences that end up trapping us because they perpetuate this cycle of seeking. And of course, usually what occurs then is we're trying to capture or re-experience something that happened in the past, and it's just not possible. And so we're still caught in the whole the dream of the separate self that's trying to have it, to get it for itself. So the direct path, being interested in the direct path, is a sign of what I believe is spiritual maturity. So when we become spiritually mature is when we actually start to let go of the whole search for experiential confirmation of our true nature, and we start to become interested in a potential that's deeper than that, and that must essentially be ever present. So then, instead of seeking for some particular experience, we become more interested. We actually become more interested in what actually is here and now. And if I am unable, if I feel, or I presume that I'm unable to recognize and contact my true nature here and now, then instead of assuming that I need to seek something or my experience needs to change, then what I'm actually become interested in looking at is what am I superimposing on this moment? Or how and why am I insisting that my true nature, freedom, consciousness is not here now? Do you see? So then it becomes much more direct. We're not looking for a particular experience. We're actually always, we're presuming, we're asserting that our true nature, Sat Chitananda, being consciousness bliss, as they say in India, is already the case, even if it doesn't seem to be already the case. We're presuming that that's true, and then we're engaging with our experience from that ground. And this is really where meditation and self-inquiry comes in this context, is that how do we make this shift of perception in any given moment? It's through self-inquiry or meditation. So obviously in meditation, in this context, the challenge is to let go of all seeking and to simply come to rest. As I said in the guidance, in the acceptance, the radical acceptance that there is nothing missing from this moment. And only if we're able to do that, only if we're really able to let go of that, of wanting anything, will we discover and sink back, sink into that depth and infinite space and freedom that we already are, that already is our I am presence. And I got the sense that we all just sank back into that, just as we were meditating together just now. But then, of course, we can't always take time off to meditate. We're walking, talking creatures. There's all kinds of challenges. Life is happening, we can't always take the time off to say, okay, I just need a break now. I just need to sit down, meditate for a few moments. Okay, now I'm back. So this is really where self-inquiry comes in. So the self-inquiry is really all, it's like different ways, you could say, different approaches or catalysts to actually bring our attention, to turn our attention from this outward movement towards objects, activities, things, right? Seeking outwardly, to actually turn our attention, our energy and attention back in upon itself. And then when we do that, attention actually sinks back into its source. And then our attention becomes free. It's not directed at any particular thing or object. It dissolves into its source, and attention becomes free. And when attention becomes free, consciousness awakens to itself, you could say. Awakening awakens. Yeah, there's no separate I. There's no separate Pete here or Paul over there who awakens. All that we can do is surrender, make ourselves available to that shift. Can everyone still hear me okay? Yeah, okay. I just had something strange happen to my screen.
Yeah, you are sharing your screen.
How did that happen?
I don't know.
I think in the bottom, you should be able to turn it off.
Does anyone know where? Oh, okay.
It's me. I don't know how to get it back. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, if you did you hit something, Suma? If you hit share.
Yeah, and I don't know how to get the whole thing back. Maybe I'll just come out and come in again.
Yeah, it seems okay for the rest of us now. It seems okay.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I'll leave it then.
But I can't see you all.
No, it's not okay.
Oh.
Maybe it's better you turn off, Suma.
I'll go out and come in again.
Out and in, I think. It'll be better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's better. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Okay, I lost my flow there. So where was I? What was I saying? What was I saying?
You were saying about awakening to itself.
That's right. Yeah. So when attention falls back into its source, the separate sense, the sense of a separate I, you see, dissolves, and so it's more accurate to say that awakening awakens, or consciousness awakens to itself, than I awaken. Well, because awakening is actually when the I, the limited separate sense of I, dissolves. And so the whole purpose of self-inquiry, whether it's some kind of question that one would say to oneself, like one of the most classics being what Ramana Maharshi taught, the who am I question, or what am I? And that question is not designed to just be a kind of mental exercise. It's really just a question that's designed to, as I was just explaining, bring attention back into its source. And of course, there is no answer to that question that the mind can come up with. Of course, there will be all kinds of answers the mind might try to come up with, but none of them are true. None of them are true. All of they're all just thoughts. How can I be a thought that's just coming and going? So that contemplation, which Ramana recommended, was designed to be designed to become a kind of ongoing sinking into one's most essential experience. So it's all, the whole purpose of it is to help facilitate this shift of perception, so that we shift our center of gravity from I am Pete, this historical body mind, to the pure presence of I am, which exists before anything. There is so do you all understand that there is no other aspect of reality or consciousness that can observe or witness I am? Right, so here's I am. There's nothing behind that. That's as far back as you can go. Right, that's the whole point. So the consciousness I am is not an object. It cannot be seen. It cannot be known. Why? Because it is what we are. It cannot be felt, unless we want to call it the feeling of being, which is kind of the closest we can get in terms of defining any feeling sense. But it's so important to also not equate this I amness with any particular feeling. And of course, that this is the biggest. This is where we tend to get caught and stuck the most, because we want to feel good, don't we? So we think, well, we all want to feel good. So whatever spiritual awakening of freedom is, it must be about feeling really good, or feeling good most of the time. So this is why there has to be this absolute renunciation of wanting anything in particular, of equating any particular feeling sense, you see, with our true nature. Because it's only when we let go of that we really begin to trust that no matter what I feel, no matter how it seems, no matter how crazy and turbulent, my mind and experience is right now, I am. I always am. That I amness that is witnessing and is aware of that turbulent experience is ever present, is still there, is unchanging. And that's our lifeline, if you like. That's if we're not willing to practice that movement of self-inquiry when it counts, then we'll fall down. We fall down into the self-contraction and into the dream of the separate self. And so the whole movement of self-inquiry, spiritual practice in this context is constantly making that movement back into that prior position of I amness, of being the witness of whatever is occurring. Is everyone with me? So the reason I felt it's important to emphasize this is I know you all know this. I know you all understand it intellectually, but I think it's felt important that it's to go into this more deeply, because I think while many of you have a deep grounding in meditation and you're able to make this shift when you meditate, in terms of actually stabilizing it and it becoming actually where you live, where your fundamental center of gravity is. As I've said before, meditation is not enough. There has to be this ongoing interest, curiosity, and commitment to what we could call self-inquiry. So the self-inquiry meaning pointing back towards the self, right? And what, of course, once we become established in that, then we can have inquiry into anything and everything, you know, that we might want to explore and discover from that ground. So then we can look into male and female conditioning. We can look into how our ego is structured, you know, what our tendencies are. We can look into how do we relate to the experience of pain, of insecurity, you know, issues like sexuality, relationship. You see? But for this truly to be an awakened life project, for us to be truly engaging in a culture where we're looking at all of those dimensions of life from a liberated point of view, we all need to be as grounded in this prior freedom as possible, because otherwise our inquiries, where we're looking from, is inevitably going to be distorted. We're going to be inevitably in some kind of personalized perspective. We're going to be looking through the filters of our mind, instead of being able to take a step back and actually, you know, potentially see the filters of our mind much more clearly. So what I'm describing here, this whole practice of taking the witness position, and you know, that's not really the right word, because it's not a position. Let's call it the no position. So when we're identified with mind, when we're solely identified with mind, that's where we're taking positions. Right? So this is good, this is bad, I like this, I don't like that. It's the whole world of judgments, of all of our ideas about other people. Because they look like this, then they must be like that. I mean, as I'm sure you're aware, it's infinite. You know, if we take ourselves to be the mind, we live in a kind of constant state of division and differentiation. And life and the world seems incredibly complex. And when we're living in the world of the mind, there's no real trust. There's no real coming to rest, because, yeah, we're always looking. We're seeing a world of opposites. We're seeing a world of distinctions, and we're living according to our fears and desires. And we're trying to navigate through a world of complexity and perplexity. If you all know that word, being perplexed means it's kind of like being lost in a soup, a big complex soup, and trying to make sense of it all. So the whole when we actually make that shift to the witnessing consciousness, it's important to understand in that place of pure perception, there's no judgment. There's no human mind that's saying this is right, this is wrong. There just is. We simply are, and everything simply is. And that's the posture of meditation. And that posture can become more and more of a ground that you're standing in or resting in your everyday life. If you make this effort, and it's kind of an effortless effort, to just disengage, or particularly when you start to get stuck and you feel your attention and your energy starting to become contracted, you actually bring this practice of self-inquiry and then release it, and then you're always going to be falling back into this prior witnessing consciousness, witnessing position. So what I'm describing to you is the essence of Indian Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, is the essence of Buddhism. In Vedanta, they talk about, as I mentioned the last time, neti neti. I am not this, I am not that. Everything I can perceive, everything I can know, everything that has a beginning and an ending, ultimately cannot be who I am. Why? Because I'm still here. Yeah, it all passes. I'm still here. So relatively, it can be who I am. I am feeling sad today, right? Because somebody just died or whatever. These things can be relatively true. We don't need to deny them or push them away. But ultimately, there's an understanding, there's a recognition that anything that arises, passes away, cannot ultimately be who I am, because who and what I ultimately am, and who and what reality ultimately is, must be ever present and unchanging. So that's at the core of Vedanta, and also in Buddhism, the basis of the Buddha's teaching was that there's what he called 3 signs of being. And the first is that everything is impermanent. Everything, every object that can be perceived is impermanent. And therefore everything is what's called in Buddhism dukkha, which is usually interpreted as suffering, but more accurately is interpreted as dissatisfaction or discontent. So it doesn't mean you're always unhappy and sad and despairing and suffering in that sense, but it means there's this fundamental dis-ease or discontent. Why? Because one is attached to and seeking one's reality and self-sense in that which is impermanent. And some things, of course, changing very quickly, some things change much more slowly. But the point being that if we're attached, if we're looking for freedom, happiness, fulfillment, security, in any things, objects, experiences, relationships that appear to us, we will experience this fundamental discontent. And it is this fundamental discontent that everybody wants to avoid, right? And how do we avoid it? It's by seeking. So if you imagine there's this fundamental contraction or discontent at the heart. Well, why is it that we're driven as human beings to compulsively seek? It's because we don't want to face and confront and bear this fundamental discontent. And so we project our attention out into our psychological experience, mind, emotion, feeling, memory, but also out into the world. You see, because we want to avoid this fundamental pain, you could say, this fundamental dukkha, as they say in Buddhism. So it's like this fundamental dissatisfaction, and we avoid it by seeking. And we seek for the happiness, the peace, the freedom that's actually lying. What's actually lying here behind this self knot? So let's call it a self knot, like a clenched fist. It's actually here. But because we don't want to confront the raw truth of our fundamental discontent, we seek it. We seek that freedom and peace and fulfillment outside ourselves. And so one way to understand this, I was actually sharing this in the talk in Lisbon, and I think people found it very helpful, is that all desire is actually seeking for truth, for our true nature, or you could say for God. So even the heroin addict, the alcoholic, that's what they're seeking. We're all seeking that fundamental peace and completion that actually lies at the heart of who we are. And so what happens when we gain the object of our desire, so when we inject the heroin in the most extreme example, or we we achieve the object, the material object that we've been striving for, or we find the seemingly perfect romantic partner, or we lose ourselves in the pleasure of sexual communion, or in drink, or watching a movie, or whatever it is that we do to forget ourselves. Right? When in that moment, when we actually forget ourselves, you see, we actually experience enlightenment then. You know, so everybody's experiencing moments of, you could say, enlightenment, freedom. It's that it happens when there's that kind of relief, cessation, when we have that moment or a few moments of freeing ourselves from the tension of seeking. You see? But of course, it doesn't last. So there's that release, and it's like, in my metaphor, the fist opens. But because that release has been dependent on an experience that comes and goes, then of course the tension just contracts again, and then we're back in that fundamental position of discontent. And then of course we seek again, and we usually seek for that release repetitively in the same objects, pleasures, experiences, activities that have given it to us in the past. So it's quite something actually to let this in and see that all desire is actually desire for God, and to actually see this, how it actually works in yourself. And and the third sign of being in the Buddha's teaching is no self. So everything is impermanent, and therefore everything, if we attach to it, is fundamentally dissatisfactory. And everything that arises, every experience, is essentially not self, meaning not who I am. So making this shift is at the core of all these traditions, and I'm trying to. I've always had a passion for trying to convey these timeless truths in as accessible and simple way as I can, and in a way that Westerners can really understand and relate to. Now, that whole shift, making that whole shift that I'm describing is all that we can do, really. And as I said earlier, it's a kind of it's a paradox, because it's a non-doing. It's a doing that is non-doing. And this is why it's so subtle. Yeah, because it's not a technique, it's not a method, it's not something that the I, the seemingly separate I, can do. It's a letting go. It's a surrender. It's a release. But you see, what we can do is allow that to happen. There is a factor of choice there in actually allowing that release, or making ourselves available to that release. And that's our work. You could say that's the then if that becomes more important to us than anything else, then we're living a life of surrender, of giving up, of always opening ourselves up to a higher power. And no matter how challenging and difficult life gets, always having faith and trust and surrender, as I always love to say, that there's a greater reality. Even when all you can see and all you can feel is the contraction of ego, even then, trusting that there's somewhere, I can't feel it or see it in my experience, but that which is aware is untouched. It's always already here. And if we're able to do that, we'll find our way. We can find our way through any challenge, both individually and collectively. And we're always making ourselves available for the influx, for the pouring down, if you like, or if we want to see it in the sense of something descending, the descent of spirit into and through this body mind. And we'll repeatedly recognize in all, both sometimes in very obvious ways and also sometimes very subtle ways, that there's really nobody here. There is and never has been a separate Pete, a separate Julian, a separate Pedro, a separate Karina, a separate Sarah, separate Angela, a separate Joao. There never really has been anybody in here. Because the more we pop that bubble repeatedly in experience, the more it just becomes evident that whoever I am is not ultimately an individual separate self. And yet, of course, here we all are, individuals being animated by this mystery. This is where it gets really mind-blowing. The mind can't really grasp it or understand it. There is somebody here. There is somebody. There is some movement of an individual making a choice, you could say, to make themselves available to this. But once that movement, that choice is made, once we allow ourselves to align with this deeper depth of who we are, of our I am presence, then that's revealed to be an illusion, because we realize we were never ever separate from it in the first place. So I think I said enough there. So I just want to see if any of you have any questions or doubts, or there's anything unclear about this, and also any questions you have about the self-inquiry and some of the questions I've been encouraging you to contemplate. I'd also be curious to hear if any of you have been, and what the results have been.
I have a question, Pete. It's not a good question.
It's not a good question?
No, it is not.
It's got to be a good question, Paul.
But I'm interested in hearing if I see it the right way. I mean, it's, for me, seems absurd that we are seeking something that we already are.
Yes,
and,
it is.
And how comes this absurdity? Why? That's why I mean it's half philosophical. How can you answer that? But do you see it the same way, absurd?
Well, that's why one of the responses to when one really gets this is to laugh. Or it's like, oh my God, it's so obvious. How could I ever have not known this? You see, so there is this element of absurdity in the sense of, and that's why awakening is often described as a kind of remembering. We kind of remember our true nature, because wouldn't you all agree in when you experience when awakening happens, it's not it's not the recognition of something new. On the one hand, there's a newness, there's an ever freshness to it, but at the same time, there's a sense of I've always known this.
Yeah.
Isn't that true?
Yeah.
It's kind of both, but this is the wonder of awakening. This is why it's endlessly fascinating, because it's both always the same, and yet it's ever new. Every time we recognize it, every time we recognize it, it's ever new. So it's never that sense of, oh yeah, it's already the same. It's always the same kind of I've got it. It's always ever new. But there is an element of this which is absurd. Yeah. And that's only perplexing to the human mind. It's like, but why this absurdity? Why is God playing this awful joke on us? Why does it have to be this way? You see, but that it's only the mind that sees it that way. Because for the true self, it's like, oh, that absurdity is kind of so liberating.
Wow.
Oh my God, it's so simple. And I've been such an idiot. And again, we can only kind of open to that when there's humility. If we still have pride and we're still very identified with the mind, there's something in us that resists this, because it's just too absurd. It's too simple. You mean it's not more kind of philosophically complex than that?
Mm-hmm.
Now now making sense of or inquiring into what it might mean to live an awakened life in the world of time and space, we could say that could be philosophically complex, right? There's a lot to that potentially. But the recognition itself, awakening itself, is absolutely simple. Hang on, there's a cat trying to come in. Hang on. And that's why it's I mean, that's the good news, isn't it? Because then what we're calling awakening, it's available to everyone. It's a free gift. It's a free gift of awareness itself. So can you handle the absurdity, Paul?
Pete, but I also would like you to answer to that part of the question. How does we live it in the daily life? That you'd say that would be another issue, not about the recognition, but how do we actually practically live it in the daily life?
Well, you're going to have to ask me something more specific than that.
Because I was listening to you on the Friday.
Yeah.
And it was very clarifying and different, and it just entered in a different way, and about that seeking of God, which is, well, yeah, I do resonate a lot with that. But one thing is the teaching, and that we are certain, or we can just see it and understand it, but that the radical understanding that we just do it in the practical way, that is also coming to me. The intention that we just do that, just set the intention and be open just for that to happen. But is just that only the thing that we have to do, or not do, but just this of being available to that?
Well, I'd say essentially yes. So, because then where we are grounded and where we're coming from is a place of, let's say, innocence, of not knowing, of simplicity. It's just the simplicity of being. We're empty. and then we're just confronting what is, what appears. So, of course, life is very complex, and as I said, there can be all kinds of different aspects of life and how to live in this world that we can inquire into, which of course we do a lot of in the project. But in terms of actually awakening to this ground, this fundamental ground of our true nature, yes, that's all you have to do. And then you see what comes next. You see? Because if I was to give you a different answer and say, well, yeah, you know, you can awaken to this, for example, when you're sitting meditating, or you know, you're sitting at yourself at the kitchen table. But then when your children start making a mess, or you're in some challenging situation at work, or you're in traffic and somebody just cut you off, if I would say, well, then you need to do this, then you need to do this, it would ultimately amount to giving you some kind of strategy or technique or something to do. You see? So what I'm emphasizing here at this point, and in these right now anyway, in the whole on what we're talking about, is this prior ground of where we're actually coming from or standing. And it demands, you see, it does demand that we make room for the possibility that life could be, can be, and could be really simple, regardless of, you know, all the challenges and complexities and all the responsibilities we have. It challenges us to maybe not feel that we need to have a whole toolbox of strategies and techniques to deal with this and to deal with that. And when this happens, then I know I need to do this. Do you see what I'm saying? So what I'm really pointing at in terms of self-inquiry, the self-inquiry I'm emphasizing, is that's our ultimate tool. No matter what situation you're in, no matter what experience you're having, that's the ultimate tool, because that movement of self-inquiry, as I said, whether it's a question, or in the notes I sent for today, I put it in terms of an affirmation. You know, you can just bring to mind, for example, one I just sent you, and this is something I often do myself, is that everything is appearing in me, but I am not in it. In other words, I'm not. Everything is appearing in me, in my consciousness. But I am not bound, I am not identified, I am not stuck to anything that is appearing. You see, and it's just a reminder. So this can be in the form of a question or a reminder like that. And as you get interested in this and find yourself just doing this more and more spontaneously, it won't take the form of thought. It will just be a spontaneous self-surrendering. And you see, it's that releases the contraction. This what we call we refer to as the self contraction, which is what the ego is. Right? The ego is not an entity. It's a contraction of consciousness. It's an activity that we engage in. It's what we give our. It's when we give our energy and attention to some particular aspect, fear, desire, exclusively. And it begins to contract, you see. So simply making this shift, you know, no matter what appears to be going on, can allow that contraction to relax. It doesn't mean that this is the important thing, that contraction releasing and relaxing doesn't mean that we're then going to automatically feel good. it doesn't mean that the turbulence of the moment, the challenge of the moment, the pain of the moment, whatever we're experiencing, necessarily goes away, right? But what does fade away is the contraction, and it's that causes distorts our vision. It's that causes us to suffer. It's that cuts us off from our innate sensitivity, love, wisdom, our connectedness, our sense of connectedness with everything that's occurring. So I have a feeling, Annabella, I'm not sure, but I have a feeling that maybe there's a kind, and I felt this a bit before in some questions you've asked in the past, that I think there's a kind of insistence in you, or conviction, that it can't be this simple, because my life's just too complex and I have to deal with this and I have to deal with that. How can it be this simple? Is that true?
Yes, I think so, Pete, yes. Yes.
So that doesn't mean it's easy, because most people would think, oh well, if I allow myself to open up to the possibility of it being so simple, then that means it's easy. No, they don't necessarily. Simple doesn't necessarily equal easy. But it means it could be easy. It means we open up to the possibility that it could be easy and effortless, right? But it doesn't mean necessarily that it's easy. Does that make sense?
I see.
But it does mean that we let go of the insistence that it's hard and difficult and more complex than this. And we let go of the need or insistence that it should be easy.
Yeah.
I read something yesterday from Muji, and it was something he said, and he said it's exactly the same thing as you are saying, but it said that it's the person or the individual that starts the inquiry, and it's the inquiry that finishes the person.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I thought it was really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, thought so.
Could you repeat?
It's the person or the individual that starts the inquiry. So you are identified with your whatever emotions, and you just take a distance, or you just zoom out, as Pete says it, and then the inquiry just eliminates the person, the sense of I am a separate sense, the separate sense of self.
Mm.
I don't know the exact words, but they were along.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was saying earlier, that this is where it's important to not deny. Because again, this is a big paradox. There's a paradox at the heart of this. There's paradox everywhere in spiritual life. This is why one of the reasons I love it so much. It's so fascinating. You can only look at one side of a paradox at a time. The mind can only look at one side of it, right? But our true nature can embrace the whole thing. You see, because that transcends the mind. So the paradox I'm wanting to mention is this matter of free will or choice, and so as that, what you just said is it is our individual self sense. From that ground, from that place, we whoever that I is, the I that we believe ourselves to be, can make the choice to inquire, can make the choice to sit down and meditate, can make the choice to make itself available. So let's say it's the clenched fist, right? So that it can choose to make itself available, go into that movement of inquiry or meditation, which ultimately they point to the same thing, by the way. Ultimately, they point to the same thing. But then when we release and give ourselves to that, then the person, the individual that actually made the choice disappears. You see? So we can allow both. You know, you could say that's relative and absolute. Absolutely, there never was and never has been a person, an individual who had any free will and is choosing anything. Everything is just happening. In the Bhagavad Gita, there's a line that basically says, Brahman is everything, the absolute is everything that is doing everything. In other words, everything that is and everything that's being done and happening is that. That's the ultimate recognition, realization. And yet, relatively, here we are as localized individual expressions of that. And there's some aspect of volition, of choice, so that then this kind of isolated, separated self sense begins to long for its true home. And then when we in the act of self-surrender, we actually dissolve that illusion. And we have to be willing. We have to have the humility to be willing to make that shift, to offer ourselves, make ourselves available for that shift, or make that choice, if whatever word resonates more with us, over and over and over again. But that's the simplicity of it. Because the mind wants something else. No, give me something else to do. Give me some other technique to do. You know.
So this is where I've got to right now. I'm, like Annabella, I'm kind of, give me a strategy, and no, I don't want a strategy. So I'm with you all the way, and I'm with you with past experiences of when I do just let go and surrender. And then I get into an argument and all of that goes out the window. And then, so listening to you, okay, so when I'm in an argument, I must remember to just relax. When I feel myself tense, I must just remember to relax. And it's difficult. And so now I'm wondering, okay, if I know it and I don't want a strategy, and I'm in the middle of an argument, is it a question of just trusting that choice will happen?
I think it's interesting when you say that goes out the window.
Yeah.
So I think it's letting go of that idea that would mean in your true nature, which would mean I am. Right? How can I am ever go out the window? So
because I am something comes in.
Well, exactly, because you equate your true nature with a particular something, and because you're in an argument which feels particularly bad, you presume that your true nature is therefore gone, not present, is out the window, and that's it. It's not. It's just that belief, really. Because if you try and make it into a strategy of like, is it about in that moment trusting and remembering? In a sense, yes, but if you actually if you truly deeply trust in this, and you truly deeply trust that true nature, being, consciousness must be ever present, regardless of whatever appears to be happening. Then you see you've got access to a different ground, even in the midst of great intensity. So I think there's doubt. You see, You know, Ramana Maharshi, one of his most powerful teachings is that he said in the end, all the ego is doubt.
Right.
It's simply the doubt that who I am is not here now, or has gone out the window. And then you can see, as soon as there's that doubt, then everything else follows.
Well, I understand what you're saying. In the moment, I don't see it as doubt. I see it as what happens.
Yeah, but there's doubt because what happens is that your energy and attention contracts. In other words, you know, in the metaphor I was using earlier, you leave your true home.
Yeah. No, I see the contraction, obviously.
Yeah. And then you presume, and of course this is what everybody does, it's completely impersonal, that I have lost it, or it is not here, it's gone out the window.
Yeah.
As soon as we presume that, we believe that, we superimpose that on our experience, then we become the self-contraction. And there appears to be no way out, or until we stop the argument and take a breath and gaze at the beautiful sunset, and it's like, oh, now it's back. You see? So it is, the reason it's doubt is because we doubt when our experience does not measure up to our idea of how we should feel, or something. Do you see? So that you could say it ultimately it's doubt, because the doubt is the moving away from that ground, from that faith, trust, and surrender that it is always ever present. And you might still have an argument. It doesn't necessarily mean that the fact of arguing, you know, again, it just depends where one is grounded in.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And what's happening is just our perception, right? And we cannot find this true in perception.
Say that again. We cannot find this truth in perception.
Yeah, I feel this. I don't know the name of this lady that said this is what's happening. Annabella.
Suma, yeah.
Suma. She said that she just feels that it's what's happening, but what's happening, it's your perceptions of what's happening. And what I feel like is that we cannot find the truth in perception.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, it's the same as saying that we cannot find the truth in objects, in anything that is perceived.
Yes, and I feel also that when we abandon that perception, it's when we are most ready to see the truth.
Well, maybe. I think another way of describing this is that the I amness is pure perception. It's pure perception. So it's perception without any superimposition, any insistence, any resistance, any manipulation, any wanting, any desire, any, do you see? Any interpretation.
Yes.
Interpretation. So
But it's not the perception. It is not the perception, right?
Yeah, so pure, you could say, so when Suma was saying, well, this is what's happening. I'm just using my fingers to illustrate. This is what's happening is an argument. I'm angry, I'm losing. This is what's happening. You see, so when we identify with what's happening, we lose sight of the I, or the pure perceiver that's aware of, yeah, this is happening. You see? So somewhere, what the doubt I'm pointing to is, you see, somewhere there's some presumption. This shouldn't be happening. Or because this is happening, this deeper ground truth of who I am isn't accessible, can't be here. You see, but it's always here. So instead of having our attention on what happens, you could say it's allowing our attention to sink back or dissolve into that which never happens. Because one definition of awakening is that this discovery of that nothing ever happens. Maybe some of you've heard this before. You know, Rajneesh Osho, he had this phrase. A lot of the sannyasins, they had these bumper stickers on their cars, like nothing happens. Nothing ever happens. And that is pointing to this absolute truth and ground and deepest, always ever present. No place that we are. Nothing ever happens there. So when you were saying, Suma, this just happened. See, I felt there was a kind of helplessness there. It's like, oh, this just happens, and then it goes. Then any sense of who I really, this deeper ground, goes out the window. So there's some kind of victimization in relationship. Well, this just happens. I can't stop it happening. But I don't think the problem isn't that it's happening, that anything's happening. It's the doubt that throws it out the window and says, because this is happening, I'm lost.
No, I think you put your finger on it before by just saying, I mean, I got it when you said the two can be happening at the same time. You know, the argument can be going on, and I haven't lost sense of who I am. Yeah, I found that helpful.
Yeah, then it might have an impact on how the argument goes.
Yeah.
Hopefully. or it might stop, of course. But.
Pete, can I just mention something that is being talked about, that you were just talking about, the whole thing about perception, and because you're talking about, I don't know, maybe in this example of an argument, you know, there's a lot of maybe physical sensations, emotional sensations, mind going crazy, whatever. And you're talking about kind of going in from that, and I know what you mean. I just wanted to, it's just also true in my experience that being, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but rather than avoiding those perceptions or sensations or whatever's going on, just being radically present to them also has the same effect, if you want a better word, of just
but that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Because I'm not talking about avoiding anything.
No, I didn't think you were. There was something that Sergio said, and I don't know, just the way it was sounding didn't exactly match up to my experience. Just, not running, just not running away from perception, essentially. I'm not saying either of you said this. It was just I wasn't quite clear, and there was just this motion of going inwards.
Yeah, I think I understand. Yeah. Well, this is where it's difficult. It's difficult to convey this in words, because I think when I'm making this motion all the time, it's pointing to that place of, as you just said, simply being present with what is. And you know, there's another way to approach this, which is actually the other way. Is actually, you could say, going right into whatever is occurring, you know, completely becoming one with what's happening.
Right.
And you could say that's two approaches, but ultimately leading to that same ground of just being present with what is. So when I'm making this movement, yeah, I mean, this is always the danger. It can become, it can give that sense of becoming dissociated from our experience.
Yeah.
Whereas really what it's about, or what the neti is trying to convey, is it's the release of compulsive identification with experience. And there is a kind of a falling back in the sense of into that pure presence, pure perception, I amness, that's always already there. So so I'm glad you brought this up, because when one hears these kind of teachings and it's a common mistake, it can become one can take them on in kind of a strategic kind of way that actually then becomes a movement of dissociation, or a kind of detachment that is actually there's still a doing in it. You're still somebody in there strategically trying to manage experience. Even though that might be a phase or a step that someone has to go through if they're just very compulsively identified. But what we're really pointing to is it's all about it's that simplicity of not dissociating on the one hand, and not you could say indulging or becoming completely immersed in on the other. That's the best way I can word it.
I find it I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's exactly a paradox or it just blows my mind that the being radically present to my experience here and now dissolves the separate I.
Right.
You know, to the mind that makes no sense. It sounds like to dissolve the separate I, I've got to kind of something in the body mind has to disappear, or right. Completely fade to the background, or I don't know. I just in a certain way it doesn't make intellectual sense to me, but I know deeply from my experience again and again and again that just becoming very, very present to whatever's going on means that what you've been talking about, that's waking up essentially.
Yeah.
That's the dissolving of the I, and it's not the I that's waking up. It's just and I also wanted to really highlight that what you said that earlier, because I think it's so important that it's not I am I this separate individual is waking up, which is just the birth of the spiritual ego, but the true waking up, which can happen in any moment and is happening in many moments, is the dissolution of the separate I, and that's the same as becoming present. And I think this is just thrilling and mind-stopping.
Yeah, that's the whole idea. You put it beautifully.
With this conversation.
Speak up a bit, Pedro.
Yeah, with this conversation, what came up to me, now most in the end, it is, I don't know if it's ultimately the same thing. Actually, I think it's not. But there is a link in between letting things be as they are, mm-hmm. and bringing the attention to I amness. I think it's not the same thing, but they point, to the same moment, to now, to reality. But when we were describing, like when Suma were saying that there is a issue or there is an argument happening, so because it looks like there is a different exercise, just staying with the argument, not wanting nothing to be different than what is, but it is a different quality to bring the attention, to the perception of what is happening, and there is a detached from what is happening. I think it is, I'm not being completely clear, but there is something here that I think it could be very interesting to explore. Did you get what I'm trying to convey?
Yes.
Maybe you can say more and more clearly than I'm trying to.
Yeah, well, no, it's really good what you're saying. So I would say that ultimately they're not two different things. Because, well, let's just take some of the, because this is part of the thrilling challenge of engaging in this is we need to use words and concepts to try and approach and understand and enable ourselves to kind of fall into and discover this true mystery. And so we can go about it in different ways. But like what Laura was just speaking about, of the way she put it was being radically present, right? Being radically present. So what does radically imply? It means, the word radical means to cut at the root. So radically present just simply means it's the same really as the way I've been describing it as I am. One is completely present to what is without any fear, desire, resistance. It's just present, is. And then the instruction, letting everything be as it is. It's essentially the same as that. So all of these ways of speaking about it, you see, they're all different angles, if you could say, or ways of basically pointing to this same shift in perception that we cannot. This is again the paradox that we cannot ultimately do. We can only make ourselves available to it. So, if you're in an argument, for example, if you're actually, and this is quite this would be where quite a challenge, of course, to be able to be in an argument, a challenging situation, and where strong emotion is being aroused, and to be able to let that be as it is. In other words, this is what's happening. It's okay. This is happening, and you see that. Then there would be, as Laura put, this sense that you would be radically present to what's happening and all the dynamics of what's happening. And potentially then one would be able to let go of one's position. If there was a fixed position one was holding, you see, you'd become aware of that in the argument, you see? Or it might, you become aware the other person's fixed position, and maybe you're not holding onto a fixed position, but they're holding on so tightly and furiously that you're needing to use some force to try and get through to them. You see, whatever it is. But potentially we would have access to, there would be some consciousness. We wouldn't just become possessed by our emotions and constricted in taking an opposing position. So all of these things, letting it be as it is, or in bringing some kind of inquiry question to mind that enables one to make that shift. It's all ultimately pointing to the same shift, and that's why I said earlier, ultimately meditation and what we're calling self-inquiry become one and the same, because we can then say that meditation, you see, the posture of meditation, it's not only when we're sitting quietly, it's not only available when we're sitting quietly. The challenge is, can we live a life where we're fundamentally allowing everything that arises to be as it is? only then can we be radically present to what is. And only then will our innate intelligence and sensitivity, because consciousness isn't just a blank, empty screen. You know, it's love, it's intelligence, it's the force of being. And you know, then we see what arises and what comes out and what we express. And I think it's, I would say, in the more challenging situations, we can only find out sort of how well we have done in retrospect. You see what I mean? Because when you're in the heat of the moment, you know, all any of us can do is surrender to this as deeply as we can, and bring all of our awareness to what's happening. And then of course, it's not like I said earlier, it's not easy. Sometimes it's easy, you know. And then afterwards, or in the aftermath, then we reflect, and we'll have a fundamental intuitive sense of, did I lose my ground, or did I hold my ground through quite an intense experience or interaction? Does it make sense, Pedro?
Yes, a lot. I was hearing you and I was thinking that even they are not ultimately the same thing. They point to the same place.
Yeah.
Because even if it's not a strategy or a method or a technique, it implies, on a practical plan, a change of your center of gravity, and can be done in different ways, but ultimately transport you to the same place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense?
Yes. Yeah. So we should finish soon. I just want to make sure this is totally clear to everybody. So does anybody have any confusion? And when I say, is it totally clear, that means, is this true? Can you relate to it in your own direct experience?
I don't think it's totally clear mentally, but I can feel that something has shifted.
Mm.
Yeah. It's, you know, I can feel the complexities of it, and I can feel the simplicity of it.
Mm-hmm. What do you feel is the complexity of it?
Well, at a certain point, I think it was when Laura spoke, at a certain point my mind said, okay, you can't do anything wrong. And ultimately, I think that's the truth. There are no mistakes. And then I think you said, Pete, about holding your ground. And I think that's maybe the place I could look, about not losing my ground.
Mm.
And then if I don't lose my ground, I think there are no mistakes.
Yeah, and again, it brings us to another paradox, which is, because it's very important what you said, that where we're the view from that ground is that there are no mistakes, that there is nothing wrong, and I haven't done anything wrong, you know, because I am who I really am is free from everything that happens, ultimately, right? And yet at the same time, there's a you could say an evolving organism here, that experiences a longing to live and bring this higher truth into manifestation. This is where it gets paradoxical, and we can recognize where we went off track or we didn't hold our ground. But then the challenge is to be, and this is where humility comes in, and also the mind transcending surrender is, can we perceive that and at the same time know that there's nothing is wrong, that no mistake was made, because it couldn't have been any different than it was. And from the ultimate absolute place, all is, it's all perfect in that it couldn't, it's all okay. So it's when we only focus on that relative side of the paradox, and it's more like about how I messed up, or I lost my ground, or I fell into my ego. Then we fall into self-criticism and shaming, and down we go down the spiral. Oh, might as well give up. Here I go again, I made the same mistake again. And especially with our very ingrained tendencies that we all have, which repeat themselves, of course, that's always the temptation to go down with that. And this is why, again, this faith, trust, and conviction in this unchanging, ever-present true nature is so important, because that will enable us to perceive and live with and embrace our human frailty, let's say, and our imperfections from a ground and context of no problem. But as long as we're trying to get this with the mind, then we're trying to grasp and hold what seems to be a paradox, or two sides. You see, and then that seems complex, because we can't really quite grasp the whole thing with the mind. It doesn't quite make sense. So it's only when we again make that shift of perception, it actually all falls into place. It's a paradox, and it's actually beautiful. It's wonderful. It's simple.
So you just said that when we make this shift in perception, something changes. But what I feel is kind of the opposite. When I change something in me, when I'm present, that's the reason to the shift in perception occurs, and not the cause. But yeah, actually, I don't know what comes first, but it feels more for me like that.
Well, you could say that something changes because you recognize that no thing that never changes. That no thing being that which you are. right? So something changes in your experience, but really, it might seem like I change, you know, but that's from the point of view of the self-contraction itself. So if we believe ourselves to be the separate ego, then it appears that I change. You see, but actually, what actually happens if it's genuine is, because we recognize, because we know again that which we are, which never changes, then something changes. Do you see? Something releases.
Yeah.
Something falls into place.
I think we perceive more.
Of course, yeah.
But that must be an illusion.
What must be an illusion?
This feeling that I'm perceiving more, because my feeling is that when I'm in presence, I'm perceiving much more around me.
Mm-hmm.
But what changed in me? It was something internal. How come I can perceive more?
Well, you just perceive. Again, you see, it's what I said. It's because as we release the self-contraction, we perceive what's always already there. And it's not that it wasn't available to us before.
Yeah, we choose not to
but it's
see.
Because our attention and energy is so focused on this self-contraction, whatever form it's taking, then we don't notice. You know, we're not actually available for anything else. So then when we actually release that, then we actually perceive what's always already been. Make sense?
Yes.
So, yeah, good.
I like your analogy that you used to use, that it's some kind of uncovering, and we see more.
Yeah. Or one metaphor that's kind of a classic metaphor is the movie and the screen, which is when we imagine that we're a character in the movie, we can't see the screen. We're not aware of the screen. Then when we let go and recognize that we're the screen, then suddenly the character disappears, or we see the character in context. Okay. Okay, so I think we should finish. So unless anyone else has any burning questions. Are you all right, Rui? Have you got it? All clear? Good. Sarah? Velia? It's all clear? Más o menos. That's why you should ask a question.
But I have no question now.
Okay. But if something's not clear, and it's fine if something's not clear, then really try and get clear what it is that you're not clear about, and then ask me next time.
Okay.
Or bring it to your hold-on. Yeah, and I encourage you all to bring what we're speaking about to your hold-on. It doesn't necessarily mean to explicitly to speak about this only, but if you're speaking about whatever you're speaking about and sharing together, it's always to, this was going to help you to kind of check, where are we coming from, everybody? Where are we looking at this from? Okay, so I just encourage you to just check in with that, make sure you're coming from the deepest and most grounded place. Okay, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks, Pete.
Ciao.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, Kinta.
Bye.
Bye, Vidanta.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Yeah.